We're a little late. I'm sorry for the delay in starting here. 7:05. I will call the meeting to order and ask for, if it's okay for just a moment, we'll pause, and if all would join, stand with me, and I'll ask Selectwoman O'Connell if she wouldn't mind to start us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I will note that Mr. McCoy is absent, as he had mentioned in our last Board of Selectmen meeting. He's home recovering, so we wish him well, of course, this evening. The remaining select men and women are here. I would accept a motion to approve Treasury warrants 49, 49A, 50, 50A, and 50B.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor? Unanimous. We have one set of minutes from the meeting of May 26, 2015. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as written?
So moved.
Second.
Made and seconded. Is there discussion? None. All in favor? Unanimous. Which will bring us to our 7 o'clock scheduled appointment with Christina Stewart, Library Director, to discuss summer reading programs and the town-wide yard sale. Good evening, Tina.
Good evening.
Thanks for being here this evening.
You're welcome. Good to be here. So here today to update you on some things that are coming up at the library this summer. And as Mr. Shampoo indicated, the townwide yard sale is this Saturday. It's June 13th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. We have 61 homeowners that have signed up to participate in the community-wide event. So for $15, each homeowner received 2 of these signs. And the library is doing all the promotion. We had an ad in the Crier last week. We'll have another ad this week. And we're using social media and all our promotional channels. We're also created a town map that will be available. These print maps will be available at the library, the town hall, Chamber of Commerce, Eli's Country Store, Eastgate Liquors, and Wilmington Plaza Wines. There's also a map available online on the library's website. So we're hoping that shoppers will enjoy finding good buys, and homeowners will be happy to sell the stuff they no longer want or need. And we're also hoping for good weather. But given the number that have signed up to participate in the art sale, we decided it would be best to let the homeowners decide, not the library, on whether to, go on with their yard sale, because it may be raining in North Wilmington and sunny in South Wilmington. So we're going to let it up to the homeowners to decide whether to, go forward if there is a chance of thunderstorms. And it could be nice in the morning and a little drizzle in the afternoon. So it's a little too hard to call from where we are. So it's a go unless it's a tornado or a hurricane. So some other community, I'd say, focused events that have going on at the library that I'd like to bring to your attention was one that we had in April. We had a teen job fair on April 22nd, and we really were pleased to have 100 teens show up for our teen job fair. We had about 9 local businesses and nonprofit organizations available to talk to teens about summer jobs and volunteer opportunities. And then on April 30th, we had our first Welcome to Wilmington reception. And we worked with Nancy Valley from the Chamber of Commerce on sponsoring this event. And we had town departments, some local organizations, and business participate. And I think we had about 35 residents come to the library. And it was great to see them and introduce them to Wilmington. We hope to do these Welcome to Wilmington receptions about at least twice a year. And our next one is scheduled for Monday, November 30th. And anyone who's new to Wilmington certainly is welcome to come. It's a great way to learn about the town. Another initiative, which I worked with Diane DiGregorio, the president of the Wilmington Community Fund, was a meeting of nonprofit organizations. We did this in April, on April 15th. We invited Wilmington nonprofit organizations to come together at the library for the simple goal of sharing what each other is doing and share what activities they are going on with each of the organizations, so with the goal of supporting one another and thereby better serving Wilmington residents. And those who attended were really, I think, pleased with the way the meeting went, and we're going to have another meeting on Wednesday, September 30th. So I'll send out invitations to, the 16 that we sort of identified to start this ball rolling. I think these kinds of events really reflect the tagline that the library has now, community starts here, and it demonstrates how the library is sort of moving towards a more community-centric institution. And We hope to continue to engage with the community with these kinds of events going forward. But while we're finding new ways to serve our community, the library continues to remain committed to its core mission, which is inspiring reading and lifelong learning. And of course, our summer reading program does reflect, that important mission. This year's theme is Every Hero Has a Story, and the kickoff is Saturday, June 20th. And we encourage all parents and caregivers to make sure their children take advantage of all the events that we have planned here at the library. Children of all ages can sign up. We often get that question, how old does my child have to be? It could be any age. We encourage parents to sign up and commit to reading to their child throughout the summer. And of course, we don't forget the adults. We have a great roster of events for adults going on this summer, including our 3rd annual author series. We have about 6 authors scheduled to visit the library. We have multiple copies of their books available now at the library on display for people who want to read the book before the author comes. We also have a reading raffle for adults. Very easy. You read a book, enter it online or at the library, and we'll have weekly drawings for prizes. And in addition, as you see here in front of me, another sort of, I'll call literacy initiative. We've been working with the bookstore manager, Karen Campbell, Recreation Department, Debbie Cipriani, and Linda Cantor, and we're going to have books at the beach this summer at Silver Lake. And the Friends of the Library are going to keep it stocked with donations that come into the bookstore. And this boat here will be at the library near the boathouse. And we invite beachgoers just to take a book, no charge, and they don't have to return it. So again, we're going to hope that we'll get the beachgoers while they're enjoying Silver Lake to enjoy reading as well. And last but not least, I do want to recognize the Friends of the Library. We really couldn't do it without them, especially the level of program that we do at the Wilmington Library. The volume of our programs, we're doing more and more, but we couldn't do it without the Friends. And currently, they have a Boston-themed gift basket on display at the library, and this is a fundraiser for them, and it has gift certificates to some Boston restaurants, tickets to the Boston Tea Party Museum, the Freedom Trail Tour, guidebooks, and more. Tickets are $2 or 3 for $5, and we're going to have the drawing on July 10th. So if you want to have a fun day in Boston, I'd encourage everybody to buy a ticket. And I'd also just remind all members of the Friends of the Library that the Friends are doing their annual renewal membership drive, and please, renew the membership. And certainly, if you're not a member, we'd welcome new members to keep the organization strong. So, we hope that the library's offerings will help make this summer a good one for Wilmington residents.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Very broad and thorough and concise presentation. There's a lot of things going on, so I compliment you for that. I guess we'll open up for questions or commentary, and Judy, if we could start with you.
Sure. I just want to personally thank you for being here. As always, you have a full array of activities and just, a destination for all ages, and what you do for the youth all the way up is just extraordinary. And I appreciate every time you come in that you have something new or something that you're willing to try, and certainly had a little bit more personal insight into all that goes on at the library, having worked on the strategic planning committee as a member on behalf of the Board of Selectmen. So I really got to see how well your team works together and how enthusiastic and committed they are to their respective professions. So just wanted to overall thank you for all that you do and all that you do for the community. And the library certainly has its rightful place in the town, and it's in just boundless energy and tremendous value to the community, so thank you.
I agree with everything that Judy just said. I'd just like to mention a past program you had, I think it was last Monday or the Monday before, we had a selectman meet with Tuskegee Airmen.
It was awesome, yeah.
Yeah, I heard great things about it. The gentleman's a phenomenal speaker.
It was
And
amazing.
and it was a good turnout,
and inspirational.
well attended. Yeah, he's an amazing guy.
WCTV has taped it. We were looking for, if you missed it, I would encourage you to catch it on WCTV.
I was going to be there, but we had a
Yeah,
selectman meeting, evidently with the new chair. He likes
Yeah.
to meet every Monday night.
Yes,
so
right,
I'm
I
not sure
know,
what's
it's
going
a tough choice.
on. Thank you for being here.
Just to quickly echo what's already been said, appreciate all the kind of the innovation and the constant re-examining about how you might improve the level of services. Just by way of clarification, this is obviously a beach program, and I just want to repeat what I think I heard from you, is that those things will be available at the beach. You
At
don't
the
have to go
beach.
to the library to get
Nope,
them.
these
and
are at the
it's-
beach, right. And the
So,
Friends will keep it stocked throughout the summer.
That's great. So, thanks for coming in and sharing all that information.
Welcome.
Yeah, and I'll close up just simply, echoing my colleagues' comments. I had the opportunity to participate in that new resident program, which frankly, I wasn't sure what to expect, and I thought it was very well attended. It didn't go all night, which I think was good for everybody. And I think if there's any message that I could convey about that is that, the definition of new resident can be pretty loose. Anyone that feels like perhaps there's an opportunity to learn about the community in some way, even if they've lived here for a number of years, I think should be encouraged to come. Would you concur with that?
Absolutely,
Indeed.
absolutely.
So thank you for that. And I love the innovative, sort of creative approaches you're taking to new programs as we come along, and including the beach program. So again, thank you for all your hard work and for your entire
Thank you
staff's
for
hard
having
work.
me.
Indeed.
Okay, Beamer.
Good evening. Our 7:10 appointment is with James DiLorenzo from the United States EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, to update us and talk to us about what's happening with the Olin chemical plant. So, Mr. DiLorenzo, if you want to,
I have Joe Coyne from Mass DEP, who's our partner on this project.
great, thank you.
Thank you. So I was actually asked by the town manager to come in and speak specifically about the comfort status letter that EPA recently issued. So I'll start, if the board is okay, I'll start with a brief overview of where the project's at, and then discuss this letter.
Please,
Okay.
thank you.
The Olin, most of the site investigation activities at the Olin site have been largely completed, so most of the field sampling has come in, a lot of the data has been compiled. The soil investigation is essentially done, sediment and surface water is essentially done. Groundwater issues continue to be looked at. There are some areas around the perimeter of where we know the defined extent of contamination is, that we need to make sure we've actually found the edge. And so those activities will continue this summer. I do expect that to end basically the field sampling program that began back in 2010. So it'll be basically 5 years of data collection. And then we'll be able to transition into discussing cleanup options and moving to a more formal public comment period on potential cleanup options. I expect that to happen next year at this point. So again, groundwater data will be collected this summer, and then that'll take time to go through, and there'll be another risk assessment on groundwater over the winter, spring, and then hopefully talking about cleanup options later in 2016. Beyond the large site investigation, other activities include continued quarterly monitoring of about 20 private wells around town, mostly in the Cook Ave area, but also up around Mill Road, Hill Street, up in that area, Upper Chestnut Street. That continues on a quarterly basis. There haven't been really any changes. That program began in the fall of 2009, and conditions seem to be largely stable. It's the N-nitrosodimethylamine, or NDMA, that we see at low concentrations in a handful of those 20 wells that we're monitoring. Also, on the property itself, there's a monitoring program that continues to look at the integrity of the slurry wall containment area that Olin constructed in the 2000. So that's 15 years old now. That's largely a groundwater monitoring program to look at trying to ensure that contamination's not leaking from outside, from within that containment area. We're also conducting some activities to look at the integrity of the slurry wall itself to make sure it's not degrading. And there's a Plant B groundwater pump and treat system that Olin started to operate around 1990 that continues to operate up around the East Ditch area. It's to contain light oil that was previously leaching into the MBTA tributary there. And so that is going to continue indefinitely, but that continues to operate as well. Last year, Olin completed a very important pilot study to look at pumping out what they call the dense aqueous phase liquid. That's the most contaminated area of groundwater. They constructed a pilot extraction well on Jewel Drive, immediately west of the Olin property, and ran that well for about a year and successfully removed about 500,000 gallons of the NAPL material, or DAPL material, rather. That data is being looked at now. Olin has agreed to voluntarily restart that well to continue to look at the data. They want more data, and so they're going to be starting that up shortly. They haven't yet, but I expect them to do so shortly. So that's a very important step to looking towards, groundwater remediation. Removing that DAPL material is really the worst of the worst groundwater contamination, and getting that out is an important first step towards aquifer remediation. So we welcome any additional efforts there. So it's kind of a general update on what's going on. With that, if you're comfortable with that, I'll move on to discuss the comfort status letter. Or would you like to pause for questions first?
I'm going to pause just for a moment, just to see what the pleasure of my colleagues on the board is. So I would open it up at this point with what Mr. DiLorenzo has just offered, to see if there's any preliminary questions. And Judy, if you want to start there, or we can wait until after the further discussion is had.
I'm fine to wait.
All right, very well.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, is that?
I'm fine to wait, although my question is, with the comfort letter, we have this from a previous package that had been provided to the board. Are there copies of this handy that folks can view for themselves?
The comfort letter
The
itself?
comfort letter that we're about to discuss. I mean, I'm all for hearing Mr. DiLorenzo's explanation or overview of the letter, but I know it's kind of, it'll be difficult to follow without a point of reference. So I'm just wondering, this is a matter of public record, right? So people can get it?
Yes.
Okay. All right, then, okay, fair enough. Let's have at it.
Okay, and just to clarify on that point, Mike, is that we did also share not only a copy with the town, but with the Wilmington Environmental Restoration Committee and their members, so they have seen it as well, and it is part of the public, or will be part of the public record once it's filed.
Okay.
So the purpose of the comfort status letter, well, let me back up. New England Transrail has had an interest in purchasing the Olin property as a rail operator for some time now. I guess they entered into a purchase and sales agreement with Olin Corporation in 2003, which predates EPA's involvement. The site was added to the EPA Superfund list in 2006. So back in 2003, they entered into this purchase and sales agreement. And they have been basically waiting for the EPA investigation. And so recently, with the completion of all of the soil and sediment and surface water sampling, they wrote to the agency and requested what is known as a status comfort letter, which the agency routinely issues in cases like this, where there's a developer, prospective purchaser, investor, banker who's interested in property that happens to be a Superfund site. They request occasionally these types of comfort or status letters, and the agency provides them under the brownfields. I don't know if you're probably familiar with the term brownfields. Most people have heard of brownfields. The brownfields law was passed in 2002, and it kind of set the foundation for all of this process to happen. So to be clear, a prospective purchaser like New England Transrail would automatically become liable if they purchase property that's on a CERCLA Superfund site. And that's why these types of letters are issued. They don't release those types of developers from liability, but they clarify what steps, they clarify the facts of the site, what EPA knows about the site with regard to the extent of contamination and potential health risks, and also with regard to potential liability should a developer purchase the property. So it doesn't release them. It's not a release for liability. It's a statement of facts based on EPA's investigation, and it's intended to be used by the developer to decide whether or not they want to move forward with purchasing a property, or to the extent they need financing, they can share it with their lender, et cetera. So these are routinely issued. The number of them have been issued through EPA Region 1 in Boston. So this one was issued on May 13th to New England Transrail in response to a letter we received from them. It basically says that based on the investigation to date, commercial use of the property is acceptable based on our risk assessments, based on what we know about the site, and that the site is basically okay for commercial development. So that's basically the bottom line of what it offers. And again, that was sent to New England Transrail. It's a public document, and I know some of you have probably read it, or all of you. And so that's where we're at. So the next step would be up to New England Transrail if they want to move forward with purchasing the property or not. This is one component that they're looking at. So I know it's kind of a lot to take in. I don't know if there are specific questions I could help.
I'm confident there are. So, yeah, I've got a few that I'm mulling over that I had even probably before coming in, but if it's okay, I'm going to open it up to my right here, and Mr. Newhouse, I concur. In hindsight, I wish we had included a copy of it. You're right, we've seen it, but it's not here with this. So, by and large, we're kind of going on memory, and kudos to you for bringing your copy. But nevertheless, I open it to you to, I guess, start with a question or comments.
Well, I guess, just generally, I have a comment, and I guess it would, it's a general comment, but it specifically pertains to one of the statements that you offer in the letter. And it's on the bottom of page 5 and the top of page 6, when you're describing the section about the nature of the comfort status letter and reasonable steps letter. And you, I think, highlight the point that EPA has not yet completed the investigation phase for the site, or issued a proposed cleanup plan for public comment, or selected a remedy for any portion of the site. And again, I think you reiterated that when you gave a summary of the status of the remediation effort over there. So I just want to underscore that point, that is not, it's not a revelation to you, or probably to some folks in this room, but people in the general public, I think, need to understand that the investigation phase is not complete. And that, to me, is significant given the history of this site. And I also note that in that same paragraph, you go on to say that if NET's proposed conceptual design for the property changes, then the conclusions in this letter could also change. And you've referenced attachment 1, and I'm not being critical of you at all, but I mean, I look at this attachment, and unless there's more to it than this, I would just remind folks, first of all, I'd observe that this isn't a terribly detailed concept plan for what's being proposed over there. To the contrary, I think it's pretty paltry. That said, the fact of the matter is that NET does not have a good track record of positively and accurately stating what their operations entail and what EPA's position is. So I just offer that for public comment, and I think that's why, particularly given that history, that the town and its residents and the various groups who have demonstrated a particular interest in this are going to continue to look at what exactly is the proposal, exactly what are the activities that are proposed, and, what impact does the fact that we haven't even completed the investigation phase, what impact does that have on STB's evaluation in light of that history in particular. So, I mean, it's just, I've said, more times than I probably can count that I've not come across in all the years that I've paid attention to what goes on in this town, I've not come across a single issue that people weren't, that people were any more united or unanimous in having an opinion about this project. And I just think that their proposal, when they do file, assuming they still do, warrants the utmost scrutiny. And I trust that, because I have gained a sense of trust with EPA and with you and your team, I trust that if the conceptual design changes one iota, that we'll be back and that you will revisit this the way you indicate you will. So.
I agree with Mr. Newhouse that this is an extremely important issue, obviously, and there's probably thousands of questions that you could field at any of these public hearings. Just on your recap, you had mentioned the slurry wall was going to be 15 years old. Is there any history of what the average life expectancy of a slurry wall, or does it matter how deep, how wide?
I mean, like many engineered structures, it has a 30-year design life, but that doesn't mean it'll last 30 years. It's intended to last indefinitely, but
Sure.
everything has a design life, and its design life is 30 years. And so that, as long as that remains in place, there'll be a monitoring program associated with it, because 30 years could be 10 years, it could be 200, 300 years.
Right.
But, yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on that, now, is that something that when a comfort letter is sent, or when any company wants to go in there and what their plans are for the property, like, for instance, moving trucks around 30 or 40 a day and moving all the train cars in and out, any kind of rumbling or whatever may take place could obviously significantly impact the integrity of the wall.
Right.
That would be something that I think a lot of people that have a vested interest in this would be worried about.
Right.
And that's just one of, I think, of 1,000 questions that you could, and have fielded
Right.
during this whole process, but.
Can I just comment back to Mike and Lou's statements?
Yeah.
I appreciate your feedback. I want to be clear, this is not an endorsement of NET's development. We make that very clear. This is something that, EPA, I hesitate to say are required to do, but it's something that we do under the brownfields law, and it's something we've been doing for a long time as developers and bankers ask these things. So it's not an endorsement of, it doesn't opine on what NET is planning on using the site for. And it has about, it's 8 pages long. Half of it is caveats and half of it is facts. So all of the uncertainties that Mike and Lou brought up are discussed in the contents of this letter. And again, it's up to now New England Transrail and their investors to decide if this gives them enough comfort to move forward or not, particularly in light of the fact that the site investigation is not complete and there's not a cleanup plan in place. It's the unusual aspect to this. These are very routine, these comfort letters. Having developers purchase Superfund sites is somewhat routine now. What's unusual is for a developer to step forward before there's a record of decision stating specifically what the cleanup plan would be. That's a little unusual. And so this has probably more caveats in it than a typical comfort letter because of that. So we definitely are sensitive to that, Mike, and it's taken into consideration by EPA's attorneys in drafting this letter.
Thank you. Ms. O'Connell, do you?
I agree with all the comments that have been made. I mean, obviously, I'm particularly concerned when I understand a little bit more about the mindset of releasing a comfort letter, and I think it's important to indicate that a comfort letter is more of a status update. It's almost, the word comfort, it indicates that everything's fine. And I think to a layperson hearing that might think, to me, it sounds like there are years and years still left in this. And then now all of a sudden we're talking about it transferring title to another corporation and doing what I think would be probably the least desirable types of activities to take place in an already labeled site, if you will. Right. So, we've had executive discussions with our legal team. Obviously, I'm relying heavily on the town manager and his town hall department head team through our various departments to look at this. I have a lot of concerns. I think Mr. Newhouse articulated them very well. Obviously, I'm not pleased with the vagueness that NET has come forth with to say what they're doing there, and I'm concerned about local jurisdictional rights as this is up at the federal level. So from a sitting selectman standpoint, I just want to say publicly that, I'd like to see the town of Wilmington do everything they can to avail themselves to be at every meeting and have a seat at every table and do what they can on behalf of the residents of Wilmington. I have tremendous concerns about this, and I'd like to continue to follow it. This is obviously an important update, but I really don't want to see this happen, I'll be honest with you. But I'm still trying to work through some of the dynamics to see what we can do as a town to work this through for the best of the residents of Wilmington. So I appreciate you being here tonight, but I do have continued concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take it. I'm going to hand it to Jeff in a moment, but just, I want to kind of take Mr. Samaglia's questions about the slurry wall maybe one degree further. You said it, but I want to make sure I hear what I want to hear. The comfort letter says that the site is acceptable for commercial use, but I don't know that it specifically says what kind of commercial use. So that will, am I correct in assuming that the nature of the commercial use that could go on would have impact as to whether or not that commercial use would in fact be acceptable? In other words, it was already alluded to, you have heavy rail cars, and depending on what the materials are that are coming through, it's conceivable to my untrained brain that a slurry wall or the materials that are behind that slurry wall could be upset, moved, agitated, whatever the term is, just by nature of that kind of commercial use, as opposed to a less impactful, less heavy material type of commercial use. So how does that acceptable commercial use definition get affected by when the actual commercial enterprise comes into place?
Good question. A couple of ways to answer. I'm not going to have a very direct answer to that, to be honest with you, but a couple of points come to mind that might be helpful. First off, I mean, even if NET moves forward with this process and acquires title to the property, Olin and the existing PRPs remain liable. So whatever NET or any other owner does out there, Olin has a vested interest in making sure that they don't exacerbate conditions, as does the agency. And it states that in what we call reasonable steps here that are kind of outlined as bullets in this letter. And they take into account some things like that, though it doesn't say specifically no activity on the cap, but it does talk about designing a cap that's adequate and sufficient. So that's one point, is the liability doesn't transfer here. Just, I mean, NET could assume liability if they do exacerbate conditions, and this tells them that. But they're not. Olin is not losing their liability. We're not losing Olin or the other responsible parties here. They're going to continue to move forward with the cleanup, and they're going to be responsible for it. The second point is that commercial. It's not specific to any one type of commercial or industrial development. When we do our risk assessments, we look at risk assessments in terms of a homeowner being exposed is very different than a commercial worker, is very different than, say, a soccer field. And those are kind of the three general categories. This was looked at as a commercial industrial property because it's in a commercial industrially zoned part of town. Okay. And so it's very general. In terms of how it's specifically used, that remains very much a local and community-based decision. EPA isn't and doesn't want to be in the business of saying what's appropriate on our site or not, but it's a fact that the site is contaminated, and we need to specify what's quote-unquote safe for workers, and that's what this is all about. And right now, based on all the data we have and the risk assessments we've conducted, generally it's safe for commercial workers to be out there doing stuff, whatever that stuff may be. It's not specific.
Okay.
All right.
if I may ask you about schedule, or at least to put some definition of terms to some of what you described, you said in 2016 and potentially just beyond that, the plan to discuss cleanup options would be put in place. Is that the period of time that's called the remedial investigation feasibility study, or does that precede that?
That's the termination of it.
That's the termination of it?
Yeah, we're in the remedial investigation feasibility study now.
Okay.
We have a remedial investigation for most of everything but groundwater right now. There's one pending for groundwater, so there'll be another second remedial investigation report, and that includes a risk assessment. So that's where we're at right now. The feasibility study will lay out what the potential cleanup options are.
Okay.
And it'll go through very specific required criteria. And from that, EPA will make a recommendation for a proposed cleanup for the overall site. And that's what will go out for formal public comment, formal hearing. So that's the termination of the RIFS process.
And again, forgive me, you said that was probable
Fall of 2016 right now is the way it's looking.
Okay, okay. And my last question, thank you for that, Jim. Mr. Coyne, you're here representing DEP, and I guess I'm interested or desirous to know to what degree or in what capacity DEP will continue to play a role, from this point going forward, with regards to the comfort letter and any other action items that go on from here. So I don't know if you have commentary there.
I would just, DEP is in partner with EPA right now. We usually also will oversee the O&M if any is being done on the property. If there's a groundwater treatment system or anything into the future. Right now, we're working with EPA to ensure that, the state's interests are still being upheld during the investigation.
Okay, great. Jeff, I'll certainly, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. I do have a follow-up at some point, but by all means.
Let me have Jeff have it, and then I'll certainly come back, yeah.
I would just offer that it's certainly I recognize, particularly with the brownfields legislation, that there is, as reflected in that series of laws, a desire to, at some point in time, provide an opportunity for contaminated property to be reused in some fashion. It shouldn't be forever fallow, but I think my concern, as reflected here by the board, is just the fact that this project has not reached its resolution. There's still, as pointed out, ongoing investigation. There is not a remediation plan in place, and given the track record that we've had with New England Transrail, it is of serious concern that they continue to be interested and perhaps may go forward. We are clearly monitoring the filing schedule at STB to make sure that we are aware as soon as possible if and when they do file. And GeoInsight, our consultant, environmental consultant, continues to monitor what's going on there.
Thank you, Jeff. Something else?
Just as, by way of a follow-up, and Jim had raised a couple of points earlier in response to Mr. Shampoo's questions and observations. And, Jim, you made the point that, EPA's job is, to make sure that it's safe for commercial workers to be there, and that you're essentially saying that that the status of the remediation investigation and remedial work is such that, based on this concept here, you believe that, it's safe for commercial workers to be there. And believe me, I appreciate the fact that you don't pick your property owners, you don't pick the parties with whom they might negotiate a deal, you don't pick the town that you're working in, the site is presented to you and you deal with it. And I certainly appreciate that. But the reality of the situation is that we are not in a scenario where the town has the direct ability to assess and to evaluate some of the factors that would really go into whether or not a site is appropriate for commercial use. The fact of the matter is, and, we all know, the folks who are sitting here, that the federal regulatory scheme limits the direct control that we have over that. So I just think it's worth making the observation and reminding EPA and DEP both that I think, like it or not, and, regardless of whether or not you pick your sites, the reality is that you're dealing with a proposed use that doesn't have that direct regulatory oversight that folks who are most familiar with the property and who have, the most to lose or to gain in terms of the redevelopment and prospective reuse. We don't have that kind of authority that we do in most circumstances. And so I don't think it's inappropriate at all for us to call on DEP and EPA to help us to scrutinize that prospective use. And I would just hope and remind both of these administrative agencies going forward, as we scrutinize that prospective use, that we hope and expect we'll do that in cooperation with you.
So this is not a public hearing, and normally this bullet item, it would end at this point. But I get the sense that there are a number of folks here that would potentially have a question that they'd like to offer to you gentlemen. So I leave it to you. If you're comfortable accepting a couple of questions, I'd ask you to hang for a moment, and I'll open it up for a couple of questions now. Thank you very much. That said, I want to just sort of go out there and say that we're going to keep a tight rein on the number of questions, the nature of the questions. Again, it's not a public hearing. We'll have public comments at the end of the meeting, which is the normal practice. But I wanted to be respectful of the gentleman here and other folks of their time who maybe came out just specific for this issue and don't maybe want to stay through some of the other business of the meeting. So exclusively and specifically to this subject matter, I will go to public comments for these gentlemen. So Ms. Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the board for all your comments and questions. I thought they were all really good. So I just want to say, as a resident, that I really appreciate that. One of the concerns that I have, and I don't speak for work because we haven't taken like an official position, but I can say that we were really concerned with this letter. And my question directly to you, Jim, is well, there's a couple of them, but one of them is this letter in response to the fact that there was some pushback that we didn't want OU1 and OU2 to go forward with the risk assessment without OU3 being completed? And so this is their response to that, so that they can still develop the property without actually completing OU3. OU3, to explain, if you want to explain OU1, OU2, and OU3, people understand, because originally what was happening is Olin was coming forward with health risk assessments for OU1 and OU2 without completing OU3. OU3 is a groundwater, which has affected our wells, which is the reason why it's a Superfund site, basically. If you just did it on OU1 and OU2, it wouldn't even be a Superfund site. So OU3 is the most important part of this site. And they want to come forward with the health risk assessments without completing OU3. And we wrote some comments to Jim and pushed back a little bit. And EPA agreed that all those 3 operable units would be done together, and then the comfort letter came out. So my question to you, is this in response to that?
I can't speak for NET. I don't know what premeditated them sending the letter. I am assuming from EPA's perspective, it was completing the OU1, OU2 study and issuing that risk assessment that prompted discussions between Olin and NET, and that's what probably led to it, but I can't speak for either of those parties.
So I guess what the driving at the heart of the question is, can this comfort letter allow them to develop the site without completing OU3 before the site's developed?
Yes. Yeah, I guess it could.
That's a huge concern, and I think that the town should be really concerned about that. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've been pushing for a long time. I mean, we're not doing the work that we do as citizens in the town, and the town isn't spending the resources that we're spending to have the site be developed without the issue of the contamination in the groundwater that shut off our wells to be dealt with. I mean, once that site is developed and the rains start to be turned over to NET, and that looks like that's exactly what will happen, that the rains will be put over to NET to run the remediation on the property that the
No, let
OU3
me, I'm sorry, Suzanne, let me interrupt. I want to be very clear that Olin and the other PRPs, Built Right and American Poly, they are going to remain holding the reins. There's no transfer of, all that happens is that NET now becomes another party that may assume additional liability should they mess up, essentially. But NET is not going to be responsible for the cleanup. NET is going to have to make sure they don't get in the way of the cleanup. And that's what this letter largely says, and that's what all the caveats are about, is that they won't, they'll continue to provide EPA and Olin access for the cleanup. They'll continue to cooperate, put whatever type of institutional controls may be necessary. So, believe me, it's a concern to have another party. What's that?
That's in writing somewhere,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
when they filed with the STB before, they had filed and said that they were gonna take over some of the remedial actions, like Plant B and monitoring stuff of the property.
Yeah, no, Olin, I mean, our consent order is with Olin and two other previous owners, and any cleanup consent decree that is anticipated will also be with those, previous owner operators, not NET. NET essentially has to agree to cooperate with whatever the cleanup plan ultimately is, but it's going to be performed, I assume, by those PRPs if we reach an agreement with them. If not, it'll be performed by EPA and DEP. It will not be NET or any other prospective purchaser that's going to be performing the cleanup. Just to be very clear, that's a big distinction. So even though they may assume ownership of the title, they're not assuming any of the obligations for the cleanup. That's going to very much remain.
Okay, I'll take your
Yeah.
word on it.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
But anyways, I mean, even if that does happen, that'll be great. I hope that's how it turns out. But as far as the other issue with, them being able to develop this site without actually, I mean, we've waited a long time, since 2006, just to finalize the investigation, never mind the remedial actions. And here we are in 2015, we still don't have that. And they're going to be allowed, basically from this letter, this letter gives them kind of the go-ahead to be able to develop the site without completing OU3, which is the groundwater. Yeah, based on this, right. So we're really concerned because we feel the containment area is a huge concern. Lou, you pointed out rightly, it's like, how old is it, 15 years old? It has supposedly some life expectancy of 30 years, who knows? It could be now, it could be 10 years from now, it could be 5 years from now. And then what? Supposedly the containment area is holding back some of the most highly contaminated stuff besides the stuff that's already contaminated the wells that's, in the Maple Meadowbrook aquifer. It's a huge concern for us. And we still don't even know if the containment areas actually has the integrity that they claim that it has, or whether it's leaking somewhere. One of the things in this letter it says is protecting and maintaining all aspects of the existing slurry wall containment area and temporary cap, and cooperating fully with the anticipated design and installation of a permanent cap on the containment area. And that's a concern because it indicates that the containment area is something that's going to be there like forever. And how can it be there forever if it only has a life expectancy of 30 years and we're already 15 years into it? I remember when that was put in, and here we are 15 years later, and by the time we actually do some of the remediation, we feel like it's going to be another 15 years, and then what? So we're really concerned with this going forward without the OU3 being completed and a remedial remedy for our groundwater that's affected our wells. And we felt that by holding up OU1 and OU2 that it would force them to do OU3, and now this letter takes that leverage away. That's how we feel. We think it's kind of a kick in the teeth, to tell you the truth.
Well, thank you, Ms. Sullivan. I think it's safe to say that the town of Wilmington, the government of Wilmington Town Hall share the concerns of you and the work committee, and that all measures that can be taken will be and are being taken. So this is not the end of the road here. It's just it's a position in the road. Mr. McDonald, I will recognize you, and I'll ask you, please, just to keep it relevant if I, could encourage you to.
Thank you for being here, gentlemen. I'll try to keep my comments brief. You alluded to NDMA, which, for those who might not be aware of it, is a chemical compound that's been found to cause cancer. And it's been reported that Wilmington has had a high rate of cancer. And it's also been reported that the chemical contamination has gone out from the site and has contaminated, I believe it was 5 wells, to the extent that we had to have our well field in that area shut down. And when wells get shut down, the water is no longer being pumped, and so the water is rising. And when it rises, it moves, and that chemical plume that caused those wells to be contaminated and shut down, to me, it has a likelihood of being able to move around town, specifically into, say, tributaries for downstream communities' well fields. And so I'm listening to some of the comments, and my concerns are liability for the town of Wilmington. 2, listening to Mr. Newhouse's comment that the town has no jurisdiction as far as oversight on the site. However, when a chemical plume is moving around town because wells are not being pumped and water's increasing and flowing, that's a concern to me, and it seems that our local Board of Health should be able to have some type of oversight ability to be able to look into that, or to ask you folks to look into that, because if a site in Wilmington that's greatly contaminated is contaminating downstream communities, it seems like that's a tremendous liability for the town, and I'm concerned about that. The other concerns I have, I'll use an analogy with the Big Dig Tunnel. They built slurry walls there so that they can drive a tunnel through. And then after the slurry walls are built, we see that tremendous amount of water is flooding the tunnel because it didn't keep back that water. So I hear your comments about the cap, and to me that just seems like more of a Band-Aid on a broken leg. And if we take a look at the Big Dig and take a look at the infusion of water into that tunnel and the tremendous amount of constant work that has to be done to try to keep that water from flooding the tunnel, why can't we just assume that the same thing is going on at the Olin site? So these are some of the concerns I have, and I was wondering if you might be able to speak specifically to the plume that's moving and the fact that that cap is really just kind of a Band-Aid on a broken leg, where, when the water stops getting pumped, is the water going to be flowing back out? Right now it's probably flowing toward the pumps. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Very good comments. Those are certainly issues that we're looking at, extensively, to try to bracket the full nature and extent of contamination, not only laterally, but at depth and within the rock fractures. It's a very complex hydrogeologic situation out there. In doing that, there are, I don't even know how many monitoring wells. There are at least 50 across the study area, in addition to about 20 private wells that are largely around the perimeter of where we know the extent of contamination is reached. So it's our goal to make sure that we have the contamination bracketed in 360 degrees, and to the extent we can, at depth in the bedrock. So it's being looked at extensively. That's the OU3 that Suzanne mentioned, and that's well underway. Most of that data has been collected, continues to be collected. With regard to the slurry wall, any time there's an engineered barrier like that, there's concern that it could be leaking, and there's a monitoring network around the containment area, around that slurry wall, monitoring network being monitoring wells. A lot of question as to whether or not it's sufficient, particularly in one corner where there seems to potentially be some leaking going on. So it's something that we're definitely looking at, and we'll continue to monitor and assess moving forward, and in making a final decision as to whether that gets capped or not. That'll be, there's going to be a lot of data that'll inform that decision. It's not just going to be made lightly. I mean, there's a lot of data that's being looked at.
And have you noticed, have you investigated any other parts of the town where that cancer-causing chemical compound has moved from that lack of water being pumped?
Yeah, we're trying to evaluate now. Obviously, there's a hydraulic change. There were 5 wells being pumped at, I think it was 2.1 million gallons per day up until 2003 when those wells were shut down. And that has a huge effect on the aquifer. And again, there's been a lot of data collected. I don't have answers yet, but that data is being looked at. We're certainly cognizant of the concern, and are trying to collect data to figure out what that means. But I do feel very confident at this point that we have bracketed mostly, in most areas, the extent of contamination. Not quite in 360 degrees, but almost. There's a couple of areas they're going back to later this summer to look at. But that's our goal, is to bracket it in 360 degrees, and we're almost there.
Do you have a date when you think that the analysis will be done, where maybe the chairman could invite you back to the meeting and you can give a report to the town as to that?
Yeah, so next fall of 2016, we think we'll be ready to talk about cleanup plans. Prior to that, about a year from now, we should be looking at what we call our remedial investigation report for operable Unit 3, which is groundwater. So about a year from now, we should be ready to have that dialogue.
And Jim, I'm sorry if I may, that would be more of a public hearing kind of a process, a community.
Informal public meeting like we've held before.
Yeah, it wouldn't be in this setting, probably in one of the high school or the middle school.
Yes,
forum.
and a broader, and there'd be outreach and to try to make sure people are aware it's happening.
Very well.
With regard, Mr. Chairman, for statute of limitations for the town's ability to go forward with a lawsuit and achieve getting discovery evidence and stuff like that, does the board have a plan? Have they found out if there's a statute of limitations on putting forth a lawsuit against the contaminators, so that if this plume is moving and it's identified that people are getting cancer from it, do you have a game plan for that?
Please, yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. The answer is yes, but we're not going to elaborate because that's an issue of that would compromise the town's legal ability. So I'm not going to compromise that.
I'm not looking for you to compromise the ability, Mr. Hall, but could you tell us when the statute of limitations expires and speak a little bit about that, so that we could kind of square that with his analysis date that he's going to come back to us?
I'm not looking to discuss those legal matters. I can tell you we have contemplated the statute of limitations issues, and we believe we've addressed them. But beyond that, I think that's sufficient.
I would just encourage you just to be comforted, Kevin, if such a thing is possible, for you to know that the town is in diligent communication with council, and that all that can be done is being done. So I would appreciate your questions, and the question has been asked and answered. So, gentlemen, unless there's any, I'm sorry,
Actually,
please.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. One is with regard to the potential use that may come about here if NET goes forward. Would you expect that there would be, that the particular uses that they contemplate would trigger any particular types of additional testing in order to determine whether what is happening there is going to have any effect on the contaminants or their routes of travel?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jeff. I mean, it's premature to say. I mean, we don't have the details on what they're proposing yet either. But that's very likely that there will be additional monitoring requirements that stem from whatever activities go on out there, whether it's NET or anyone else. For example, the point of vibration, which has been discussed, would probably, will certainly be considered and may lead to additional monitoring requirements around the slurry wall. But it's premature to say specifically.
And one other question, which you may or may not be able to answer, but I'd be interested to know whether there were any discussions with Olin to suggest that absent their ability to sell this property to NET, they may not have the financial wherewithal to complete the work to be done on this site. Is the comfort letter at all influenced by the prospect that Olin may not have the resources otherwise to complete the work?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, we, as part of our consent order, Olin had to provide all of their financial information and take certain steps to provide financial assurance. It's not quite a bond, but it's very similar. And every year they have to resubmit that to us, which they recently did. So we are well aware of their financial status, moving right along, and there are steps in place to ensure that there's at least some money to go towards the cleanup at all times. So that financial aspect, the only financial aspect that weighed in is that we want to be sure that any money that comes from the sale goes to further bolster the reserve fund for the cleanup, and that's the only discussion we've had. But in no way do we believe that they need to sell the property to move forward. They have the financing as far as based on what they've disclosed to us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anything else from the board before we close up, please?
I do. Jim, and again, this is more of an observation than it is a question, but I think that it is worth pointing out that in the comfort letter, in the kind of the introductory portion, you make note of the fact that you describe EPA's primary mission to protect human health and environment from the exposure risk posed by contaminated or potentially contaminated lands. And then you also acknowledge that in doing that, EPA also recognizes the social and economic benefits of returning contaminated lands to productive use. And I can't argue with that point. I happen to agree with it generally. But in this case, I also want to point out that in your letter, you also make the point that the whole purpose of a comfort letter and reasonable steps letter is so that the interested parties and the stakeholders, and in this case, NET, can make an informed decision. And, from my perspective, allowing NET to proceed without having completed the investigative phase doesn't accomplish the goal of moving forward, making an informed decision. And I think the point was made in the audience earlier that that until all of the investigative work has been done and an RIFS is generated, frankly, that NET's not proceeding with the most information that it can. So I don't. I'm not trying to be argumentative with what's in the letter. I can't take issue with the truthfulness of it. But I think that if anybody tries to argue that NET is proceeding with sufficient information because of this, I'm not buying it. You've acknowledged yourself that while these letters are pretty common, you're not used to getting them before the investigative work is completed. So I just think that's worth making that observation in public.
Thank you.
Good point.
Thank you. Ma'am, please.
Just a point of information, Mr. Chairman, I'm Martha Stevenson, I'm president of WORK. One of our members is Councilman Mike Raymond from Woburn, and he had a conflict with a financial meeting in City Hall this evening, so he regrets he couldn't be here. But I think Woburn City Hall should be notified or sent a copy of this letter more formally than having it come from you. That would be helpful, I think. Thank you.
I'm going to hold off, Mr. McDonald. If you stick around for public comments, we certainly invite you to ask then. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you being here this evening and keeping us updated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Transition the meeting at this time to communications, and I will turn it over to Jeff Hall, Town Manager.
Mr. Chair, the first correspondence was sent out this past week to John Gavin, working with Tennessee Gas Pipeline. It's a follow-up from a meeting that was held on April 21st with staff regarding the status of the pipeline. At that meeting, we were advised that the pipeline is proposed to run along the utility corridor for most of the route through Wilmington, with the exception of the piece that is slated to run under the Benevento property. At the time we discussed this, we expressed our concerns about running a gas pipeline under an active quarry, and had requested specific information about other examples where this was being done. We were provided with a couple of communities, one being out in the Lunenburg area, P.J. Keating, the so-called P.J. Keating pit, and a second location in New Britain, Connecticut, the Tilcon yard. Unfortunately, we weren't provided with any details whatsoever about the particulars, whether those quarries are still in operation. So the engineer, Paul Aluni, had submitted a subsequent request, and we're still not received any information. So this essentially formalizes the request and formalizes our concerns about that. Also, the letter seeks to confirm the conversation that was held back on the 21st, which is that the route would continue along the utility corridor. The current filing lists only a portion of the pipeline running along the utility corridor. We've been advised that they will not formally establish the route until their filing probably in September. That's the status of that.
Thank you.
Second is a memo to the board. This is a follow-up from the last Selectmen's meeting. There was a request to provide information related to the individual members of the Finance Committee in terms of their expirations of appointment, and particularly the qualifying dates, so-called qualifying dates, which are actually the dates that individuals, the most recent individuals, were sworn in.
If I could, Mr. Chair?
Please.
I appreciate this information. I actually noticed the minutes specifically talked about a list, and certainly this is a list. I'm wondering if perhaps, certainly my mindset may have not been clear, but one of the things I'd appreciate having is the correspondence to these folks as to when they, were informed that they were appointed. Copies of the letters, The letters went out, congratulations, you've been appointed as a member. And then whatever follow-up letter there is to acknowledge the swearing in that would reflect the day and times that they were respectively sworn in. Is that what the qualifying date is, Jeff?
Qualifying date is the date that the town clerk or the assistant town clerk swore those
them in?
individuals in.
All right. So if we could have copies of those letters, please, I'd appreciate that.
So the letters confirming their appointment, and then
I assume that I can picture in my mind's eye that there's some sort of certification that then goes out. In other words, and it might be the same letter, I'm not sure, but a letter goes out, says you've been appointed.
Right.
Please see the town clerk.
Right.
You go in and see the town clerk, you get sworn in, then they send back a letter that says, here's to certify you've been sworn in. I think that's the case, but it's been a while, so
Yeah.
if we could have copies of that correspondence, please.
Okay. Next is correspondence from Alice Hooper. This was included in the previous packet, but I'll just read it into the record again. She's indicating a desire to be reappointed to the Board of Registrars, directed to myself and the board. I am writing this letter to express my interest of being reappointed to the Board of Registrars for the town of Wilmington. I have served in this position for many years and wish to continue my service for the town. Thank you for your consideration. Next, under correspondence, there are actually two items from the Verizon Fios. Both letters are seeking to inform the public about changes, realignments, and channels. In one instance, certain channels are being realigned, and there'll be notice that would have gone out June 5th to subscribers. In the second case, notice going out sometime around June 15th.
So we have board to consider items that begin with the Registrar of Voters.
Mr. Chair, just to follow up from the previous meeting, you'll recall that there was some question as to the action that the Democratic Town Committee was looking to take. It was my recommendation that the consideration on this issue be deferred pending a letter. A letter was prepared and submitted by Gary B. DePalma, Chair of the Democratic Town Committee. It reads as follows. This letter is in response to your request on behalf of the Board of Selectmen for the town of Wilmington in compliance with MGL Chapter 51, Section 15, as it pertains to the appointment of a member to the Board of Registrars. On June 1st, 2015, the Wilmington Democratic Town Committee held its monthly meeting and voted to have Roberta Lasky represent the Democratic Party on the Board of Registrars for the town of Wilmington, Mass. Please do not hesitate to contact me should you have any questions. You'll note also it's handwritten in Alice Hooper, looks like Mary Lorenzo put in for the position also. It was noted when the letter was presented that according to the general law, the committee is required to bring forward 3 names. So that prompted Mr. DePalma to reference the other 2 individuals apparently that had expressed interest in the position. So at this time, it's the board's call as to who you wish to appoint to fill that role.
Yeah, to me, you know, the Section 15 of the Board of Registrars, it says it here, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find, Mass General Law, Chapter 41, Section 15, there's...
Sorry, it's actually 51.
I'm sorry, am I reading it wrong? I don't have my glasses on, forgive me. It talks about how the chair of the Board of Registrars should gather his committee or their committee together and take a vote and make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen for the vote. So we have an individual who articulated an interest in being reappointed, and we have a different individual being recommended by the chair of the Board of Registrars. So I guess it's to the pleasure of someone on the board to either make a motion or engage in questions, or I guess I would accept a motion if there was one to be made.
If you could, hold on.
Please.
I didn't read the statute because I misunderstood what was in front of us here. So you've got the current board, Souza, Hooper, Ward, and George, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Mrs. Hooper puts in to be reappointed. We then get a letter from the Democratic Town Committee Chair saying that they voted to have Lasky represent the Democratic Party. So I have not reread the statute. Is that a recommendation, or is that their right to fill that seat? I just don't
Well,
remember.
the statute states that they should bring forth 3 individuals. I guess they've opted to recommend 1, but there's a provision here that, see if I can find it. Every such appointment shall be made in a town by the Board of Selectmen or the appointing authority from a list to be submitted to them by the town committee of the political party from the members of which the position is to be filed, containing the names of 3 enrolled members of such party resident in the town. It goes on from there. By a majority vote at a duly called meeting. So the law requires that the party have a duly called meeting and vote to bring forth 3 names. Apparently, in this instance, as I understand it, the committee met and at its monthly meeting brought forward 1 name, Roberta Lasky, and then when they were advised that the statute requires them to reference 3 names or to bring forward 3 names, it's noted here that Alice Hooper and Mary Lorenzo put in for the position. So it doesn't suggest to me, and I've not had a conversation with Mr. DePalma, that they are necessarily recommending those 2 individuals, simply that they expressed interest in the position.
Right, and I'm reading this section again now as you highlighted it, Jeff. Every such appointment shall be made by the selectmen when there's a list of 3 brought forward. So we have 3 that are brought forward, right? Hooper, Lorenzo, I'm not sure if that's the right way to pronounce it, and then Lasky. So I move to reappoint Alice Hooper.
Second.
It's, you know what, that's how I read it too, but I'm unclear as to whether or not, personally, that's the spirit of the letter, and regrettably, Mr. DePalma is not here to inquire. I have a motion and a second.
If I may,
please.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, the date that Mrs. Hooper put in her letter stating that she would like to be reappointed was May 15th. And this letter to town manager is June 2nd. So I'm not sure if there was a meeting in between or if that was...
There was a meeting on June 1st, so this was initiated by a letter that I sent out on April 6th, which referenced the statute, specifically cites the provisions here, and indicated that the Board of Selectmen, I'm writing to you on behalf of the Board of Selectmen in compliance with MGL Chapter 51, Section 15, as it pertains to the appointment of a member to the Board of Registrars. Please accept this letter as official notification from the Board of Selectmen that the term of Alice M. Hooper, a member of the Board of Registrars representing the Democratic Party, will expire on April 30, 2015. Then it references the law. So that was the first communication, and then we didn't hear anything for quite some time, and then that prompted a call. I think Beverly make a call or email. Yeah. So based upon the email and phone call, it led to
I mean, just a
letter.
quick discussion on the motion. I recall being copied on those notices. I remember them being in our packet. I mean, and I understand they're bringing 3 names forward, but to my way of thinking, we had a person who served for an extended period of time, expressed an interest, and kind of at the last minute, we get a recommendation on going a different direction. So that's the purpose for my motion.
Just by way of information, Ms. Hooper has served in this role since 1997.
The motion, as I understand it, is for three names. Ms. Lornazo, if we're saying it correctly, Ms. Hooper, and Ms. Lasky, as a group of three to be approved as members of the Democratic Town Committee Board of Registrars. Is that your motion? No, it's not.
My motion is to reappoint Ms. Hooper based on the three names that have been brought forward. I think that the Democratic Town Committee letter that was delivered to Town Hall apparently on June 5th here says that they voted to have Lasky represent the Democratic Party. I'm reading the statute that says the Board of Selectmen make that appointment when the party brings forward three names. And, we had notified the party, the Democratic Party, some time ago, and Hooper puts in for reappointment after serving since '97. And then there's a recommendation to the contrary at the last minute, but, okay, I acknowledge receive the recommendation. I move to reappoint Alice Hooper.
Okay. And I have a second. I think that we've had discussion. Unless there's further discussion, I'll ask for the vote. So all in favor of that motion? I'll vote unanimously. Thank you.
The next item under Board to Consider is a request by Scott Grant, Chair of the July 4th Committee, that the restriction be in place for prohibiting hawkers, peddlers, transient vendors, and temporary or transient businesses from conducting business within 1/2 mile of the town common area and at any area along Fordham Road during the dates of the Fun on the 4th, which, as you know, are June 30th through July 4th, 2015. This, as you know, is to allow the local nonprofits who set up business to conduct business.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. Discussion? All in favor? Yes? Unanimous?
The next Board to Consider is a recommendation request from Valerie Gingrich, the Director of Planning and Conservation, with regard to seeking the board's authorization to sell the property at Alder Street. This is map 49, parcel 5. This would authorize us to go forward and issue an invitation for bids for the sale of this property. As you know, we put together a document that goes out, it's advertised publicly. The minimum bid price in this case, based upon the assessor's recommendation, is $8,500.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there a motion on the board? Or a question?
Move to, Jeff, in terms of approving that sale, we make this motion, and then what's then we get the deed at some point
That's
in the
right.
near future? Okay. Then I move to approve the request.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Discussion? All in favor? Yes?
The next request is a request that has been submitted by Jim Buckley, and it is to seek authorization to utilize the Swain parking lot and the green space connected there on June 20th to hold a pickleball tournament. It's my understanding, based upon the correspondence, that the proceeds from this tournament will go towards the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center for Cancer. I've had discussions with the two chiefs. They have no concerns. The area that is contemplated for use would be the green area itself. My understanding is they're going to be setting up registration tent there, and then the parking lot between the green space and the senior center would be striped out for courts. They're going to be using some tape, as I understand it, to establish the court area. And the event time is 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Based upon the schedule, there are no conflicts there, so I would recommend approval, just conditioned upon contacting Mike Woods to see if they need any setup for barriers, also any trash receptacles or barrels to be put out. They would be expected that they would restore the site to its condition prior to its use, any cleanup be done, and any trash that's generated can be brought over to the dumpster over at the high school and placed in that area.
Thank you. I see, Mr. Buckley, that you're in the audience, so if you desire to say a word on this topic, I give you that opportunity, but you're not.
Better off saying nothing.
Very well. So thank you, Jeff. Are there questions, or is there a motion on the board?
With the town manager's recommendations and the no conflicts, I make the motion that we grant the request.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Yes. Thank you. Good luck with the event, sir.
Thank you.
That concludes the regular business. I will ask if there are any public comments this evening. Mr. McDonald?
Thank you. Few different subjects. Just wanted to start with the Kinder Morgan pipeline. Question from Mr. Hull. The original proposed location for the Kinder Morgan pipeline was down an old railroad bed to the southerly side of the pumping station. You mentioned that there was a alternative route that was going to be going through the overhead transmission line right away. The original proposed route is very close and abutting the water department property. However, it's downstream. The alternative route is also close to the water department property, but it's upstream. If there was to be a break in that line, it flows into the well field. So my question to you, Mr. Hull, is what are you doing in terms of delegating the duties to, say, the town engineers to come up with an alternative route to the alternative route proposed by Kinder Morgan?
There is currently no alternative route to the alternative route. The route that is, and let me be clear, that this is certainly not something that I believe is going to serve the town's best interests to begin with. It's my sense that this is essentially a pass-through that allows Kinder Morgan to get gas to destinations beyond us. That being said, we're trying to look at making the best of a difficult situation. So the route that is being considered at this point is along the utility corridor, which would be less disruptive than the original proposal.
My personal opinion on that is that
Kevin, with due respect, we appreciate that you, I'm sure, have lots of opinions. I'd ask you to keep it to questions and answers as opposed to an opportunity for you to have your opinion heard. So if you have a follow-up question, I'll invite that.
Follow-up question, Mr. Hull. There is tremendous blasting at a quarry there that could impact that pipeline. Why is it a better route to move that gas pipeline closer to that blast quarry and going through that quarry site? How can
The-
that possibly be better?
The section through the quarry was part of the original plan, so that is, again, that's not something that we are recommending. We are strongly encouraging them to identify another location, but the fact of the matter is that their original proposal contained a route that was very close to two of our wells and continued through a portion of the quarry. The sections they have relocated place a good portion of the pipeline in the utility corridor, but they have not altered the course going through the quarry.
So my original question is, let me just rephrase it. Do you have any intention of trying to come up with a better route to the alternative route and to have your engineers work on that so that that disastrous potential is averted?
We will be looking at all options to keep that from happening, yes. As you pointed out, I think in a prior discussion several meetings ago, Mr. McDonald, that this was a foregone conclusion, so I'm glad you came around to the idea that we ought to be opposing it.
I'm a little bit disappointed that you haven't already delegated the duties to your engineers to come up with an alternative route or reach out to the state and maybe go along 93 as an alternative route. So
We appreciate your disappointment. Do you have another question, sir?
One of the topics tonight was the restriction of hawkers and peddlers to a half mile from the town common. And I think that there might be a misconception on the part of the people of Wilmington to think that the 4th of July committee is a town entity rather than a private entity. And I just wanted to point that out, that Mr. Garant, I believe, is an officer of that private entity. And I'm just questioning, for example, the Shriners or any other person that wanted to have some type of stand out there. Why does Mr. Garant's entity have exclusive rights to the 4th of July?
Okay, and you went just far enough for me to say you're done with questions tonight. If Lou, as a member of the 4th of July committee, would like to respond to it, I would invite you to, and then we'll move on.
Sure, I believe, and Jeff can correct me on this, when we're giving out the hawk and pedal licenses, there is a caveat in there that they know that during that week, that area, that buffer zone is created for nonprofits in town, Kevin, people that volunteer their time to different organizations. That's their big week to make some money for their endeavors. So that's kind of how it is that the 4th of July committee, which is a separate entity, as you pointed out, comes in front of the board just to ask for permission, and the town has worked with them for years, and it's for the nonprofits in town to be able to make their money and sell their wares as opposed to a private for-profit.
It just seems that, if the Shriners, for example, they're letting the town use their property or this private entity use their property, organizations like that are nonprofits, I just don't think that you should be limiting and restricting other people from coming in like you're doing.
Well, thank you for your opinion.
I would just say that, to me, it's been a non-issue. I've never had a complaint from the Shriners saying that they felt that if anything, they've opened up the red carpet to the town and said,
They
have the facility, and have gone above and beyond to be charitable along with this. So I would just say respectfully to you, Mr. Chairman, that, I think we're addressing an issue that isn't an issue.
Yeah. I concur.
So-
Thank you, Judy. If nothing else, I think it highlights the fact that we have a number of nonprofit charitable organizations in town who leverage the opportunity to have a community event and raise funds so that they can provide services to the community as well. And the Shriners are a part of that, as are a number of other organizations. So I don't think there's anything negative that can be said about any of those events. So thank you very much. I'll go to new business and committee reports, and I'll start to my left. Judy, if you have anything for us.
No, I mean, I just want to say that tomorrow night is the next Gentile Farm Development Committee meeting on June 9th. Unfortunately, I won't be able to attend that due to a family obligation. Jeff and Vice Chair Kevin Kyra, as well as Kendra Emerald, will be leading that. And certainly at a future date, we'll have more updates for this board. I also wanted to comment on the package that we received as an update. I appreciate the town manager taking the time to provide some correspondence for the Finance Committee appointments. I have some additional emails that I'd like to have distributed, and I will make a commitment to share those with the manager's office and ask for distribution out to all of you to be added in to the additional correspondence to what you've already received in preparation for June 22nd meeting.
Very well.
So I
Thank
wanted to
you.
make sure, under full disclosure, I'm sharing that now.
Thank you. Lou?
Good.
Good for the afternoon? Mr. Newhouse?
Just by way of a follow-up to Judy's comments, to whom, who's on the email exchanges that you're describing?
Some of them are between a full distribution list that includes the town clerk, town manager, John Doherty, the FinCom chair, the moderator, and myself. Some include just correspondence directly with individuals that I've just itemized. So just to give you a full email distribution, it's what I have from my inbox that I think would just add to more communication. But I don't claim to have every email. I don't believe I was included on certain distribution lists. I'm not sure. I can just share what I have.
I don't want to create make work for the manager, but I think this is important, and I think the manager obviously spent considerable time putting together emails that he had, and I got some of the way through them. I think what would be helpful, and I presume that we could do this with our IT people, can we simply get all emails? I mean, Ms. O'Connell was saying there's some emails that weren't included in the package that we got. In the package that we got, the town accountant, the assistant town manager, and the town clerk were copied on some, not the others. Can we simply have just the IT department just go to the server and just give us everything at once? I would think that's a pretty simple chore.
What is it you're specifically looking for? Anything associated with the Finance Committee on any matter?
No, on the appointment process.
Sure, we can have IT. I mean, I spent, as I mentioned to you, Selectman Newhouse, a good 2 hours trying to cull through emails to identify this stuff. If there were emails that I missed, I certainly apologize, but certainly we can have the IT folks go through any and all emails. Do you want to reference a date certain, or?
Well, when did the issue of appointments first start, Judy?
Board was CC'd on a letter on December 10th that noted that there were 2 vacancies on the Finance Committee.
I mean, that's accurate. I mean, I don't know if there were any prior emails to previous conversations, with Mr. Doherty and, Kendra Emerald, for example, or anything prior to that.
Why don't we say starting July 1st of last year?
Sure, that's fine. I would think it's easy enough. I'm not an IT person, but I would think rather than putting you through the exercise of going in an inbox and sent items and word searching, I would think our IT people, especially, we have that department now, let's just ask them to do that. I would think it's simple enough for them to do.
I will have a search of all emails related to the filling of Finance Committee vacancies from July 1st forward.
Thank you. I don't have anything else, Mr. Chairman.
Very well. I have nothing from my desk either this week, so we'll look forward to 2 weeks from today, or whatever the date is. The 22nd, I think it is? Yes, June 22nd, our next meeting. So if you're ready, Jeff, I'll ask you to go through the important dates coming up.
First date, as was previously mentioned, is tomorrow evening, Yentile Farm Development Committee, here in Room 9, 6 p.m. June 12th is the Rotary Trivia Night, Shriners Auditorium, 7 p.m. June 13th, the Town Beach opens. Also on June 13th, as was noted earlier this evening, the town-wide yard sale, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. June 14th, the Farmers Market begins, Town Common parking lot, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. June 14th is a flag retirement ceremony at the Minuteman headquarters, 3 p.m. And then on June 19th and going into the 20th is the Wilmington Relay for Life, Wilmington Middle School, Friday afternoon, the 19th through Saturday morning, June 20th.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion to adjourn, and it's seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes, yes, thank you. Good evening.